we've got the technology working. Welcome to the second of our electric vehicle webinars. My name is Jason Fowler. I'm a partner at Gardner and Theobald, and I will be your host, moderator, and chair for this morning's session. This event is part of an EV series that we are running at Gardner and Theobald, including a number of thought leadership articles on our market intelligence microsite. There's going to be a third webinar later this year, and I'll come back to that and provide further details to be at the end of our session this morning. By way of introduction, it's worth revisiting the context for adoption of EVs in the UK. We took an historic step on the road to ending our contribution to climate change when the government announced on the 18th of November last year the end of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in the UK by 2030. This will put us on a course to be the fastest G7 country to decarbonise cars and vans. Between 2030 and 2035, new cars and vans can be sold if they have the capability to drive a significant distance with zero emissions. But all new cars from 2035 will no longer have internal combustion engines. Although not the only route to achieving the government's targets, electric vehicles have emerged as one of the leading contenders on the road to zero. Gardner and Theobald has extensive experience in three key areas in which work is being done to help meet the critical challenges of EV uptake, including infrastructure development and delivery, facilities for R&D and manufacture, and facilities for product placement and brand experience. In our first webinar back in March this year, we focused on development of charging infrastructure to be installed throughout the UK to sort of help with adoption of EV vehicles. Today, we intend to focus on R&D and manufacturing and the challenges involved in equipping the UK to sustain our existing and build a battery and vehicle manufacturing sector for the future. We intend to consider the challenges of developing a gigafactory in the UK, the technological development for batteries and vehicles, and the associated government policy, including support through funding. We're very fortunate to be joined this morning by a panel of senior industry and government representatives who will, over the next hour, share their thoughts on how the UK can meet this pressing challenge. We have Tom Glover from Heatherwick Studios, Peter Rolton from Britishvolt, Marco Longhi, MP for Dudley North, and Richard Francis, our own Sustainability Director at Gardner and Theobald. So welcome to all of the panel members. On agenda, there will be an opportunity at the end to pose questions to the panel. Please do use the function at the bottom of the screen to raise these on the chat as we progress through the webinar this morning. We have also some questions sent in ahead of today, and should we run out of time to answer all the questions that you have, we'll respond to you by email or phone after close of the webinar. In addition, it's important to just point out that we are recording today's session, and we'll send out a recording to all attendees, so there's no need to make copious notes. And finally, I would just offer that all the speakers in this day and age that we live in now are presenting remotely, so please do bear with us if we experience any IT difficulties. Great, enough of the introduction. I'm going to kick things off in terms of our discussion by asking each of our speakers to introduce themselves and give you a brief overview of their role and organisations. So Peter Rolton, if I could come to you first.
Jason, good morning. And first of all, thank you for inviting me on here this morning. So I'm Peter Rolton. I'm Chairman and UK CEO of Britishvolt. Britishvolt is currently in the process of building the UK's first at-scale gigafactory up in the northeast at a site called Camas, which is just north of Blyth in lovely Northumbria on the map behind me.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And over to you, Tom Glover from Heatherwick.
Hi, I'm Tom from Heatherwick. We're a design studio that look at everything from things the scale of perfume bottles right up to things the scale of cities and airports. And my specific role within the company is I lead the design of everything that is not a building, so products and objects and research and development.
Thank you, Tom. Marco Longhi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marco. As you can see, I have something of an international background. I am the relatively newly elected Member of Parliament for Dudley, hence the otherwise known as the capital of the Black Country, which probably contains some of the largest supply chain to the automotive industry. My recent advances, I suppose, even in Parliament, if you could say that, is that I've recently been appointed as trade envoy by the Prime Minister to Brazil. And Brazil themselves have got some unique technologies of their own with the use of ethanol in internal combustion engines, I might say. However, I'm not here today to speak about in my capacity as trade envoy, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Marco. And last but by no means least, Richard Francis.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Francis. I'm Director of Sustainability for Gardner and Theobald. I've been with G&T for 15 years, handling sustainability issues across the spectrum of their services and activities, with a particular emphasis, which we'll be talking about today, in the last couple of years around net zero carbon, again in across the services, both buildings and transport and other areas. Thank you, Jason.
Great, thank you, Richard, and thanks to you all again for taking the time to join us for this discussion. Moving on to the core part of our debate around R&D and manufacturing, Peter, if I can sort of come to you first, acknowledging the great progress that Britishvolt have made, securing a site, securing planning consent, and indeed celebrating start on site only on Monday of this week.
Yep.
Up in Blythe. What are the main challenges that you've faced in the development process?
So I think the main thing here is that the UK property industry has got very excited about the idea of gigafactories. UK Gov has declared that between 4 and 8 are needed to meet market capacity. There's also 14 gigafactories other than our own planned in continental Europe at the moment. There's something like 160 already built in China and Asia. So we've got a bit of catching up to do, and we need to catch up because, of course, the rules of origin that come in by sort of 2027 mean that you're not going to be able to put batteries that have been imported from the Far East into vehicles in the UK or Europe and call them European or UK vehicles, so they'll then be subject to tariffs. So lots of excitement about gigafactory sites. The truth is they are quite a unique challenge in terms of trying to find a suitable one. The first and most important thing is getting adequate grid connection. The sort of manufacturing process for a lithium-ion battery is very, very energy intensive. You need typically somewhere in the order of 50 megawatts per 10 gigawatt hours of production. So, I mean, we're planning at looking at doing sort of 30 gigawatt hours. That's straight away 150 MVA grid connection. We're now actually looking at doing a bit more than that. Now, the national grid in the UK, I think it's fairly well known in sort of property and development circles, is pretty overloaded already and under capacity. So finding somewhere where you can just turn up and get a grid connection on a short time frame is a real challenge. Typically, if you make the inquiry, National Grid will say to you they want 5 to 6 years and probably 50, 60 million pounds before they're going to provide that sort of size of plug socket. Now, nobody has a business plan that says apply for a grid connection and wait 5 years before you can do anything. So you've got to try and find some. The challenge for Britishvolt was finding a site we could go to and get started straight away. We were very fortunate. We found what we think is probably the only site in the UK where you can do this, which is up at Camas in Northumberland. We are on the coal stockyards opposite a former power station. The power stations, which were coal-fired power stations, have gone, and the coal has gone from our stockyard. So it's quite an interesting proposition here, because we're part of that journey away from the old-fashioned fossil fuel technologies of coal-fired power and mining into zero carbon and batteries. The other principal driver for us here was that we've got a deep water port the other side of our front door. We're able to buy the rail head next door, put the rail in. So we've got power, we've got rail, and we've got deep water. But also, by virtue of the fact Norwegian Interconnector and North Sea wind farms that are going to come onto sites next to us, we will also be able to have 100% renewable electricity. So a big site, an available site, a grid connection, and renewable energy. Those are the drivers that you need for lithium-ion battery manufacture, and the ability to make that all-encompassing, holy grail of the zero carbon battery. And then I suppose the final things were land price. Land in the Midlands is currently pushing £1 million an acre for development and employment land. The Gigafactory proposition, we bought 230 acres. It doesn't support those sort of land values. And if you look at other factories that have been looked at around Europe or what Northwold are doing, no one is paying commercial land values to get gigafactories away. We bought our site for what's effectively agricultural land value. So from a property development point of view, if you're a property developer, we're a poor customer because we're not going to pay the money that you're probably looking for, because it's all about the added value of the employment and the economic uplift. So it's a fairly unique sort of set of circumstances that bring you together for a gigafactory site. And then the last one is a planning regime. We were able to deliver a planning permission for a £3 billion facility in 4 months. And typically you're looking at a year, 18 months or longer to get something like that over the line with a full planning permission.
Yeah. Okay, look, thank you, Peter. That not inconsiderable challenges, of course, and I know you guys are moving at pace through some of those challenges. So it's great to see that. Moving to you, Tom. There is clearly a link between design and development of the vehicles and the batteries that will power them in the future. How do you see, acknowledging your involvement in development of the aero vehicle, how do you see vehicle design developing and also sort of bringing in what are the potential solutions for commercial vehicles as well as cars?
Yeah, so we're not actually vehicle designers. We're a multidisciplinary design studio who looks at everything, and with a particular focus on the city. And so we think of vehicles, and when we were approached to do aero, we were thinking of it as a piece of the city. And in a similar way to when we designed the new bus for London, and trying to give dignity to the passengers and create an interior space that people would want to enjoy. When we were approached to design a car, we thought, well, hang on a sec, what does this skateboard platform that electric vehicles and the new battery technology allow us to do that cars don't do at the moment? And when you're able to get rid of annoying things like gearboxes and push wheels to the front and the back of the vehicle to create a really, really large room inside a car, you're able to then look at cars today and think that, hang on a sec, cars are unused in cities 90% of the time. They're just parked there by the sides of roads, and that seemed crazy to us. That's prime real estate in cities all around. There's about 1.5 billion cars on the planet, and each one has about 4 square meters of, and could that be a more useful space? So battery technology really allowed us to think about that and create a room inside your car, which can be a dining room and a work from home space. We were designing it during lockdown, and so we were all sat in our bedrooms, sort of designing away. But could your car be that space? And at the moment, when you see someone sat in a car on a phone call, you think, oh, have they had a row with their partner or something? But it's if you make the interior of a car a space that people actually want to be and enjoy and live, then that could unlock and make cars less damaging. And I think the other thing that electric vehicles and battery technology has allowed us to do is think about how cars can contribute to the city in a greater way. So could cars actually not just not do harm? So if you've got sustainable batteries, that's great, that they're not impacting on polluting the city. But could you actually go a step further and clean the air and take dirty air out of other vehicles and from the particulate matter created by tires and brake dust, suck that in and pump clean air out the back? So those kind of ideas that we were able to explore only because of having a skateboard platform and designing a fully electric vehicle were really, really exciting to us. And I think there's massive customer demand for that. We had such an enormous reaction globally to that idea, and the cars going forward into production as a result of that. So by unlocking those sort of new ways of thinking about vehicles, there's clearly a massive demand for it.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think you raise a couple of excellent points about how, making the product more usable for people will accelerate its adoption, and also the added benefit of trying to use the vehicle to clean the air around it, such that the technology is available to allow you to do that. It is clearly something that will also drive people toward using those cars to make the cities and places they live more livable.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Richard, if I could come to you, Peter touched on the sort of rules of origin and to some degree, therefore, the embedded carbon in manufactured products. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the environmental, social governance perspective and how this new industry will need to respond to the growing demand for action in this space from all corners of society.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. I mean, we were talking before the webinar about how unique we are in the UK, and we sometimes don't realize it. You rightly said at the top of it, Jason, the bit about new petrol cars and vans in 2030, but actually there's a much larger ESG picture around this, where as the UK is the first major country in the world to have a net zero carbon commitment by 2050. In July of this year, they released a decarbonization strategy by 2040 for transport. And considering that transport is the largest sector of emissions at 27% in the UK, this is obviously an area where we need to address and we need to take on new things. The other part of this, I think, which is critical is, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk on this a little bit later, is just the development of net zero companies. Every major company in the world, 1/3 of all major companies in the world have a net zero carbon policy, which captures automatically the transport emissions that they are now reporting on publicly, many of them for the first time. So while we've had a pretty good handle on building emissions and we've had a pretty good handle on transport emissions and largely kept them separate in company reporting, the new rules of the game mean that companies are now required to take ownership of carbon emissions around transport. That's on the operation side. The other part of this, which I think everybody who's been working in buildings for the last 10 years will be aware of, and it also relates to products like batteries. And I was really glad to hear that we will be having renewable energy in the factory, because that's key, isn't it, right? It's the amount of carbon that goes into the production of the materials. And if you just think about it, broadly speaking, if you are using renewable energy to produce a battery, which then is going around and not producing any emissions in operation, that's the holy grail. If we can pull that off, that's a major coup. If we can do that in the UK, it's the place to do it, because we know increasingly in the UK that the sale of electric vehicles is doubling year on year. So there's a market here as well. So regulation is forcing it. Businesses even outside of the electric vehicle transport are in favor of it and seeing the benefit of it. And consumers are getting much more comfortable with this. And so really sort of pushing on an open door when you talk about these things.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. I mean, I think it's the flow through the process from funding to manufacturing to product placement and utilization of those ESG principles is key as it starts to line up and really drive the adoption. But thank you, Richard. Marco, moving to you, it's clear that in this new industry there's a need for government support to establish the sort of necessary manufacturing capability in the country, and we know many initiatives are in place, including the Automotive Transformation Fund and others. Do you believe, perhaps you could talk a little bit about whether you believe enough is being done and how we in the UK might compare to other countries in government encouragement of this industry?
Thank you. So what I would say is that, look, the UK, as Richard has just said, is really leading the way policy-wise, but it's also putting money where its mouth is, in a way that I'm sure is kept under revision as new innovation, technologies, and challenges too become more apparent. I don't want to draw too simplistic a comparison to COVID, but when you're in a new arena completely, you have to adopt that degree of flexibility, and I do believe that the government sort of embodies that approach. So the UK does continue to be obviously one of the best locations in the world for generally automotive manufacturing, but I would say particularly for electric vehicles, we've seen major investments coming in to electrify the whole supply chain. This will create jobs. It'll create, it'll secure existing jobs, and we're obviously looking to create a competitive future for the sector. So we've seen some of that manifest itself now already with Envision and Nissan, who've announced a £1 billion investment in Sunderland, which I'm sure you've read the headlines as I have, does have government backing. So there are still hundreds of millions of pounds to support the mass scale production of batteries for electric vehicles, and we are dedicated to securing UK gigafactories in order to deliver on the government's ambitions.
Right. Okay. Thank you. It would be good from the conversation we've had thus far to explore the technological development for batteries and vehicles a little further. I mean, Tom, perhaps back to you. I'm curious around how you are anticipating likely technological development with the design of the Aero. You've already said that the sort of, I think you call it the skateboard platform, allows a different a concept for use of a vehicle as a space. Do you see the next 10 years or beyond providing opportunity for further significant development of the use of cars, and how much have you prioritized adaptability for the future?
So as a studio, we're interested in metamorphosis and in creating those moments of surprise and delight at when things change. And so in the Aero, you're able to press a button on your remote control and the seats transform themselves on the interior into a double bed, and into a dining room setup, and into a meeting room setup, and into a gaming pod. And that allows you a lot more flexibility and adaptability on the inside. But also, at the moment, the car is designed to have level 4 autonomous driving, which means that the car will drive itself, but you have to pay attention to the road. It actually has all the technology embedded in it for when the legislation allows level 5 autonomy, which is you can turn away from the road and get on with whatever you're doing. It's already equipped with that technology, and it's just waiting to turn it on. And so it's important, we're trying to remove any design obsolescence in the design of products, and I think that has to carry through to the batteries as well. When we were designing Google's headquarters, the building shell is designed to last 200 years, and we have no idea what the future of work will look like in 150 years' time. So we had to design the interior of the building to be fully flexible, and it can be changed and adapted. But it means that you don't have to knock the whole thing down and start again every time. And I think that's something that's really important to bring into the world of vehicle design, where vehicles at the moment are designed to last 7 years. And how we can swap in and swap out batteries and create that sort of future proofing in the vehicles we're building today, which will have such a massive impact on the sustainability of vehicles going forward.
Yeah. Okay. No, great. Thank you, Tom. It is fascinating to imagine how people will use that space in the car in the future in so many different ways, isn't it? It's great. Peter, if I can come to you, you talked about the development of what are significant manufacturing facilities a moment ago, and I just sort of wonder how we can safeguard those facilities for adoption of emerging technologies, recognizing that the batteries themselves, the technological development in that space is still fast-paced, isn't it? And what do we need to do to ensure we stay at the forefront of that technological development in the UK?
So I think there's several things there, Jason. I think, first of all, I think it's important perhaps to recognise that the internal combustion engine is at the end of its evolutionary cycle. So engineers and designers have pretty much, squeezed every last bit of, refinement and performance out of it. Whereas the EV and the technology that runs an EV and the batteries themselves are still really at the start of that, development cycle. So, the big push at the moment in this industry is for more energy density within the battery. If you think about, perhaps the Mark I Nissan Leaf had a range of about 70, 90 miles. The current one will do 250. I know I'm going to predict here, by sort of 2030, you're going to go out and buy a family hatchback with 500-600 miles range, at which point range anxiety, for instance, is going to become a thing of the past. But of course, anyone who follows this space, will see that everyone's inventing a new battery every day. And I'm bombarded with stuff that says, we're doing lithium ion. Well, lithium ion's old because someone in a lab somewhere has now produced a something battery. And of course, what they're doing is they're producing stuff at a lab scale or a prototype, scale. And what's actually needed, of course, in the industry is deliverable batteries that will run and can be produced on a reliable basis. So you need to be at the forefront of technology. You don't necessarily want to be right at the very, cutting edge. Otherwise, you'll find yourself cutting your own throat, as they say. So, we're working already on those next iterations of batteries. We've just gone into a relationship now with the Faraday Institute and Oxford University on a joint development agreement for solid-state lithium-ion batteries, which are clearly going to come. But we won't jump into those until they are, a scalable product that you can make reliably at scale at the right price. And also, you're going to get the use in service that you need from them. And one of the things that people kind of forget with batteries is everyone kind of has got what I would call perhaps the Duracell mentality, and they think it's sort of one size fits all. In reality, the batteries that need to be designed are actually specific to the application. So the performance criteria for something like a performance electric vehicle versus a car versus, say, a white van are actually really quite different, okay? Both in terms of the power takeoff, but also the number of recharge cycles. A white van running around the city is going to do many times more recharge cycles than, say, a domestic car sat on the drive. So what that operator wants and what that manufacturer wants is, again, quite different. So I predict what we're going to see is a growth in different sort of, I suppose, cell chemistries, cathode anode configurations, cell types, much more energy density, but also then these more exciting cell formats that are going to start to come forward, in a few years' time. And it's going to be an interesting journey where we end up, in the next sort of 10 years.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you, Peter. And do you think that the manufacture of those batteries will drive development of new facilities or adaptation of existing? I mean, it is going to be a very different process, isn't it, potentially? And I suppose, that those buildings that we develop now we need to just envisage that they are as adaptable as possible for future use.
I think the thing there to perhaps think about, and we just sort of go away a little bit from perhaps from the EV bit, is that, you know, we're going to have a situation where you've got obviously the climate change piece with nature giving us lots of problems. Then renewable energy, which of course is still nature, is actually the solution. The only way you actually really fix the generation and the climate change bit is to have a battery in the middle. So energy storage, right, is absolutely key to all of these agendas. So EVs, what everyone's talking about right here and now, because of course the car is such a significant part of our life. But what I think you're going to see is a cascade away from just vehicles into the application of batteries in many, many more places that we currently don't even think about.
Yes, yes. Interesting. Thank you, Peter. Marco, if I can come to you, I guess having heard that, what would you say are the priorities for government going forward, and what are they seeking to incentivize as the industry develops over the next decade?
I mean, clearly it wouldn't be my sphere of competence, but certainly not appropriate for me to comment on any discussions with any potential investors in the marketplace. What I can do is speak with confidence about what I believe is a very, very strong commitment by government to make this work. So I can't, I mean, I recognize some of Peter's earlier comments around land values, and it would be incredibly tempting for me as a former member of planning committees and as a property developer as well to wade in that conversation. I mean, look, you know, we know the Prime Minister has a 10-point plan. We recently announced £500 million as part of a wider commitment of up to £1 billion to support electrification of UK vehicles and their manufacturing supply chain. So there's not an awful lot I can say to that, but I know that in addition to the government's commitment to the greening of not just the transport sector, but the country, and how we want to reduce our carbon footprints. You know, we are hosting COP26, and who knows if any announcements may come out of that. You know, I'm not part of the organizing setup, but I may well be hosting some sessions there. So all I can really say is that for those listening is, you know, if you're an investor, if you are a stakeholder, you have a direction of travel that is well in train, and there are spin-off areas that I believe that could come from this, that you know, as a businessman, I'd be very excited about. And of course, you also have a government which is conscious of the fact that the best solutions and the innovations will come from the private sector. So it does not want to step in and say, you should be doing this technologically as opposed to something else. Government will step back and say, we want to green ourselves, and then government will wait for the private sector to respond, and then it's up to government to then create that business environment which will be as supportive as it can be in delivering on its wider ambitions in conjunction with the private sector.
Yes. Yes, I suppose it is going to be, isn't it, Marco, a sort of busy time for government in the fact of the change that is created by this shift from fossil fuels to alternative energy, both in terms of sort of revenue and the way in which revenue is collected, and the desire to incentivize the right behaviours, be that around that embedded carbon in the product, or the, you know, we were talking prior to the webinar about the recycling of the batteries, and how that's handled. Is there anything you could say about those areas of sort of, you know, how the government will seek to incentivize the right behaviours within the industry around taxation or incentivization, regulation, or otherwise?
It's too early days, I'm afraid, Jason, for that. So other than sounding like a broken record and wanting to build confidence into the conversation for those who are investors in the area, all I would say is clearly the government does rely on a huge, very significantly on the revenues collected by the taxation of fossil fuels. So replacements will have to eventually be considered for that. I mean, there have been, much to my consternation as a conservative in the past, issues with, policy proposals around road pricing. So I imagine that will be a conversation that will be had again. But I have not been personally part of any of this policy area. That is obviously firmly within Department of Transport and Treasury type conversations. And as I say, I'm an ordinary backbencher. Please don't forget that. And but of course, I do get to hear what might be on the anvil.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Before I come to you, Richard, with the sort of final question in this section, I just wanted to remind our audience that we have the ability to raise questions on the chat. Please do sort of post those as we travel through the conversation so that we can come to them, perhaps do some sifting and come to them at the end in order to address as many as possible. So thank you for that. Richard, having sort of listened to that part of the debate, I'm interested in your views on the skills you believe the sort of industry, the consultant community, perhaps specifically, need to attain to best support clients, funders and others as we travel through the next decade.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. If I might, I want to back up on something that Marco said because it relates to the ESG question, just very briefly, and I think it's critical. Which is we tend to focus on the E part in this debate, and it's obviously where we need to spend a lot of time. But the employment opportunities by a gigafactory and the upskilling in general and spin-off in terms of a decarbonized economy is actually something that gets overlooked, I think, a little bit. And that S part of the ESG and sustainability is getting bigger and bigger all the time. So the ability to sort of upskill and educate people around this economy should not be sort of overlooked in a project of this size. On to your more general question about the consultants. It's interesting here, if you look at the discussion over the last half an hour or so, it's very wide and it covers everything. So it's about transport, and it's about technology, and it's about zero carbon, and it's about jobs and skills and so forth. So what can a consultant do to this besides sort of keep a very open mind? I think in terms of sustainability, a couple of things. First is business case around all of this. This is only going to work if it makes financial sense. And so the kind of things that G&T brings, in a sense of cost and program and difficulty is critical. Absolutely. That's sort of first and foremost. Sustainability has a long history of being regarded as sort of a little bit expensive and not delivering on performance. And that's changing, and that will change here as well. And the ability to make that happen is key. Second thing is, the two words that we're sort of underlying the discussion today are zero and whole life, aren't they, right? So zero carbon, zero embodied carbon, zero operational carbon over the course of the life of the project, which we're touching on when we're talking about the flexibility of the factory and the desire to be innovative. That's key. I'm thinking of a company like Amazon, which sort of covers the whole category here. They've got a zero carbon company commitment, they've got a zero carbon buildings commitment, and they've got a zero carbon transport commitment. And obviously that's an unusual animal here, but that's what we're up against, the ability to sort of link together the different segments and pay attention to the details, but also understand that transport and electric vehicles are part of something much, much larger. Changes in lifestyle, changes in transport, changes in expectations among consumers. And a good sustainability consultant will know that whatever we put into effect has to work now and has to be flexible enough to work going forward. So in addition to the typical business skills that you might bring to make something viable today, I think a good sustainability consultant for sure would bring a fair degree of horizon scanning and flexibility to understand that anything that we if we were to watch this video in 2 years' time in the carbon space, it would look dated. Net zero carbon as a concept is 2 years old. And look at the penetration of that. I think the one thing I'm finding in terms of sustainability, it used to be alphabet soup, right? Every country was different, different standards and so forth. What's happening globally in the last 2 years for businesses and for our clients is a full recognition that carbon is here to stay. It needs to drop. It's good business to do so. And there isn't really any other alternative than to take a big bite out of this and make it work.
Mm. Okay, thank you, Richard. That's great. Listen, to sort of close this part of the discussion before we move on to more general questions, it's kind of it's good perhaps to just ask for reflections from all panel members based on your particular experience and background on what you see as the most exciting thing about the UK EV marketplace. And whether you're sort of feeling that the UK is well placed now to continue to be a world leader in EVs. If I can invite sort of views on that. Peter, do you mind if I come to you first?
That's fine. Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to follow up first of all, just really on what Richard said. I mean, just on the ESG agenda, what we're seeing, which is a good thing, is that the big institutional investors really now looking for companies to have a very strong ESG agenda, to the point that actually, if your ESG agenda is rubbish, they're not going to invest in you at all, actually. So, and in terms of how markets look at you, valuation of businesses, capitalization on markets, they're looking again for strong ESG agenda. So actually, there was that saying, it wasn't that business is just about business. Well, actually, it's not. Actually, business isn't about business, but also doing the right thing while you're doing it. And that's been, I think, quite refreshing for us at Britishvolt, because it's meant that we've been able to set ourselves out a very clear and very strong ESG agenda right from the get-go, you know, in terms of starting the business. So that's a good thing. And then I think the other thing I'd say really is on the 2050 agenda. What we're already doing now is we are actually reverse engineering our strategy. So we're saying, you know, 2050, where does the world need to be? What do we need to do working backwards, not from here forwards? So we're working backwards on our sort of product developments, where we want to take the business, what we want to do with it, rather than just trying to look forward. So 2050 is net zero. What do we need to do working back from it, not going forward from it? And then sort of lastly, just on your point around, you know, EV in the UK, and, you know, can we move forward? Will we be a market leader? I mean, we've done quite a lot already. I mean, UK Gov has done a lot with things like Warwick Manufacturing Centre, UK BIC, Oxford University. So we've got that sort of ecosystem around the academia that you need, you know, to get your A samples, your initial designs, your sort of pilot plants type facilities are there. Okay. What we really need is actually, if we're going to do this seriously, is more sites. Okay. And the problem at the moment is the sites currently are locked into the sort of traditional sort of property development type cycle with inadequate infrastructure, high land value prices, and it's much more easier to build an Amazon shed than it's ever going to be to build a gigafactory. So really the strategic identification of those sites, but also the funding of the forward funding of the infrastructure to get them ready is what's actually needed. Whereas at the moment, we've got a sort of hit and miss type approach where people like us are going around and we're buying up the sites that actually work, but that's not a strategic play, that's an opportunity play. We need to get this into a strategic piece now.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Thank you, Peter. Marco, if I could come to you, I know you need to leave. Have we lost you already, or could you just give us your views on the future very quickly?
I think very briefly, if I may. Thank you for bringing me in, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I am actually very excited. Amongst other things, I'm a businessman and I'm an entrepreneur. And had I been a few decades younger, I think I'd probably be thinking very much about where I was going to be investing my energies, resources, and learning, indeed. And I think this is a very exciting time for UK PLC as a whole, for a variety of different reasons, but taking a sort of clear leadership on an issue that globally there is only really one direction of travel, notwithstanding opposition commentariat. We do see this as an area that we just simply cannot ignore, and therefore we're investing heavily into it. Peter has clearly made some important points. I do recognise that land values are an issue, and what I would say is engage with your combined authority mayors, with your elected mayors, should you have one, if not with your sort of regional MPs, and make your case. That is really as far as I'd like to comment in relation to that, because this doesn't just tick clean energy boxes, as I perhaps stated earlier, but it also ticks the levelling up agenda that I know the Prime Minister is very keen to deliver in the regions that us politicians would perhaps describe as red wall seats. So when you transition from northeast to northwest and coming through the Midlands, that is the belt that I know in particular the Prime Minister wants to deliver on, because historically successive governments have not really kept pace with the change that's come with the loss of industry to offshoring and that sort of thing. So the key moment is now the investment in skills, the investment in jobs, the investment in all sorts of areas is really knitting things together very, very well. And as much as I don't like too much these phrases, the leveling up really is about creating those opportunities that in the past were not available. And so the government is very keen to decentralize sort of that investment that's historically always been London, Southeast, to the regions, particularly across this belt. So yes, very exciting times.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Marco. And
I will leave now.
Appreciate you need to leave us. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for your input. Tom, if I could come to you with the same question, your sort of views on what's the most exciting aspect of this industry for the next few years.
Well, when we launched Aero, and everyone can look online and see, the public reaction we got to the air cleaning story just absolutely blew us away. It was something that we could never have predicted. And so I think that there's a huge appetite for solutions which go beyond not doing harm. And we know that we all need actively healing design solutions. And I think that that's where there's a massive area for growth, in that that battery technology, we know that lithium-ion batteries are not very good for the planet at the moment, even though they're better than fossil fuels. So it's the potential to have solutions that actually actively clean up, and that's what really excites me about the future technologies in this field. So yes, of course, we need more factories built in the UK, and I think the other thing to say is that we're a UK design studio, and we've been approached by a Chinese company who clearly see the value in design in the UK, and employed us to work on a car that's going to be built in China, potentially internationally as well, but initially in China. So that's a really exciting thing as well, that people really value British design.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom. And finally, Richard, to you, your views on the next few years?
I think there's two things, Jason. I was reminded when Tom was speaking, my first job was in alternative fuels and vehicles 20 years ago. And the excitement then was drinking a glass of tap water, which were the emissions of a fuel cell coming out of Ballard's fuel cell. And I think it's important, that seems like a long time ago, that's 20 years ago. But in the space of time, actually, that's really quite short. And I don't think anybody would have imagined, particularly in the last couple of years, just all of those seemingly distant ideas coming to fruition, coming to commercialization. That's happening rapidly. It's also the case that our way of living is changing significantly as well. So what we were thinking about the future back 20 years ago doesn't look anything like what it is now. So, I mean, the one thing is, I think it's exciting because these things are beginning to happen. The second thing, which I'm acutely aware of, I think maybe by my background, again, being here in the UK, is just what a privilege it is to be working on these issues here. And we were talking about this before the webinar, but just a couple of facts so that it doesn't just seem like a bit of jingoism. The UK had the first building certification, BREEAM, 30 years ago. The rest of the world followed suit. The UK has the first net zero countrywide carbon commitment. The rest of the world is following suit. Those of you working on buildings know that the UK is putting forth the most serious and significant frameworks for zero carbon buildings, and everyone is copying us. The UK hosts the World Green Building Council, which developed most of the work around health and well-being. And when you look at registered projects in that area, the UK, as a small country population-wise, always comes in second or third. So we are swimming in an environment which cares about these things and has expertise and really is a bit of a light to the rest of the world. Another example of this might be something just as simple as the BCO Guide to Specifications, which again, we use routinely and think of it as just another tool, but in fact is again, one of those ones which is used globally as a recognition of the talent and the experience that comes out of the UK. So the most exciting thing for me really here is we all take an agenda around decarbonization for granted, and we latch onto it and we work with it in a way that's not true for lots of other countries where there's a bit more resistance to this. So to be able to be here, whether we realize it actively day in and day out, we are in an environment where there is talent and there are ideas and there is innovation. I think the real test going forward, the real excitement about this is how do we begin to work together and how do we begin to join up what is a sort of very separate streams, right? Whether it's technology, vehicles, decarbonization, sustainability, and run the common threads through all of those to make the model work most efficiently and most effectively. I think the last thing, just briefly, again, we talked about this prior to the audience joining us, is just the degree to which green and healthy products in other industries, and we always, it's always good to look outside other industries, whether it's food or whether it's cosmetics or clothing or whatever, green and healthy products are outpacing conventional products everywhere in the world at an enormous pace. And electric vehicles and low emission vehicles in general is very likely to be the next segment of the world. It's already beginning to happen already. And I think that's something exciting that we see. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. I mean, thank you all for your views. It does strike me that the pace of change is one key consideration, isn't it? And the need for us as an industry to collaborate and embrace the change, and perhaps to try and build a common voice around some of the principal issues that may be blockers. Perhaps the land value issue that Peter raised, if we can find a common voice and, as Marco put it, make our case with some volume, then we've every chance of overcoming those obstacles sooner rather than later. But fantastic. Thank you all for your views and some really useful insights into the emerging market. And how we generate a sort of successful manufacturing sector in the UK around this. It's now time to try and address some questions from the audience, and we've had certainly one come through on the chat around funding. So Christopher Buck, I think I'm right in saying, has posed the question to the panel: who will fund new battery manufacturing and recycle centres? Is it government funds, developers, investors? Perhaps, Peter, if I could come to you on that front.
Yeah, okay. So So government support is important, but the sort of scale of funding for these factories, I mean, we, depending on the various options that we take, could be looking at somewhere between 3 and 4 billion, not million, billion pounds for the facility we're building up at Camas. The entire ATF fund that the UK government set aside is only a few hundred million. So you're not going to get the funding from government, that's for certain. What you might get is some financial support at the start, which is obviously what the ATF is there for. And the fact that UK Gov supports you is a very significant thing within the funding market when you're then going to subsequently talk to investors. But right here and now, it is investor money, it's private money, it's taking your business through the various funding rounds, and ultimately, as we will do, listing it on the stock exchange, whether it's the UK SPAC, whether it's the US SPAC market, or whether it's a UK, LSE listing. But that's the route you need to go, because the sums of money are very, very significant.
Yeah, understood. Thank you, Peter. Any other views on that or the recycling element from the panel before I move on?
Well, I would say recycling, again, there's a immature technology is the recycling bit. One of the areas where there's a lot more research and development needed is on recycling. We've got a whole team that's looking at different recycling, technologies, try and decide where we're gonna go with it. We know we need to have an infinity recycling centre as part of what we'll have as the facility we build. It's a bit like trying to pick which racehorse to put your money on at the moment, I have to say, though. So again, that's an area we're going to see. We need more research on. We need more development on. We need more, clever thinking. The good thing is, one thing the UK is really good at is with our very, very excellent, academic institutions that have been around for many hundreds of years. This is where we can make a difference. So we are working with several academic institutions around that recycling piece.
Okay, no, thank you, Peter. That's understood. Sorry.
Oh, Jason, I was just going to add on that, if I might.
I'm in, Richard, yeah.
We're talking about sort of net zero, and rightfully so, about zero carbon. But of course, I think there's every expectation in the sustainability community that zero is going to apply to other areas as well. And it, in fact, it's going to find its way into regulations. So, every indication that net zero water is coming, net zero waste is coming. And so obviously, although it's not there now, there will be a regulatory framework for dealing with whole life waste, in other words. So, and that's the regulation, that's the sort of the stick part of it. The carrot part of it is the company that can figure this out will do well in terms of a business and public perception, because clearly people are much sharper about the question comes in would be the kind of question that anybody going to buy an electric vehicle would have, and they do have, because that's one of the reservations. It certainly was a reservation around hybrid cars early on. What happens to the battery? How long does it last? What do I do when it's finished? Yep. And so the solution to this is not just a sort of a public policy problem. It's a business opportunity, because the company that does this will be rewarded from the market.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Richard. That's great. I suppose the other question, and I'm going to try and fit one more in before I say sort of thank you and sign off. Apologies, I think Peter's had to leave us, but there's another question from Rory Ford on, do you see the integration of sustainable energy plants alongside future gigafactories, such as hydrogen from waste plastic, to increase the feasibility of potential site locations? I don't know, Richard, whether you would have a view on that.
Yes, but not in a couple of minutes. It's a very complicated. No question, and I'm not an expert, but I mean, we again were talking before the meeting about, we're moving out of a fossil fuel economy, and we are moving into a hydrogen economy, but it's always just that little bit further than everybody expects. But there are experiments going on around Europe around this kind of thing. It is feasible. It will come. How it will come and when it will come is a little bit more difficult to know.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you, Richard. Amazingly, the hour has flown by, and I think we're just about running out of time. So I would like to say to those that remain, a final thank you to our panel for sharing their views and experience. Thank you also to all our guests who've taken the time to join this webinar this morning. I do hope you've enjoyed the content and the discussion. And just finally, from me before you go, please do visit our Gardner and Theobald Market Intelligence microsite if you would like to read more about the EV market and some of the thought pieces that we've collated there. Please do reach out to myself or Richard in particular if you'd like to follow up or have any specific questions or projects that you'd like to discuss with us. And I'd just like to flag for the future that the final in our series of 3 webinars on product placement and distribution will be held in November. So please do look out for that. And when we send out the feedback survey after today, you'll be able to register your interest in that event. And we do very much hope that you'll be interested to join us. So again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to all our guests. And I do hope you've enjoyed the session this morning.
Thanks.
Cheers. Goodbye.